warm welcome to episode 37 of my Doll's House Diary. Now, in today's episode I'm going to be making a few changes to the study. Now, I originally planned on having a beach themed study, but because I'm also working on a beach themed shop at the moment over on my Patreon channel, my little harbour homewares shop, I feel that I'll just be creating more of the same. So I want to do something different in my doll's house. So I'm still going to be sticking with the blues because I really love the blue and cream combination, but I'm just going to be doing something slightly different and making it into a more sort of relaxing, romantic setting. Okay, so let's get started. So this is the image that I'm going to be using as inspiration for the study, and I think I've even shown this image before as I copied the fire surround for the study with that sort of black insert, and I really liked the idea of having those lanterns and baskets in the fireplace. But I really like this colour scheme, and I'm even thinking of redoing the sofa in that lovely blue velvet if I can find a sort of small enough blue velvet. And I also really love that rug, and I think that would be something that I'd be able to recreate in there. So only very slightly different, but it just means, as I say, I won't be recreating all of those sort of beach themed miniatures to go in there. And I've also chosen a new wallpaper which I'm going to use on the chimney breast. And as before, I saved a good quality image which I found on Google Images, and then used Adobe Photoshop to turn that into a full A4 sheet, which is just the right size for the chimney breast. And I've actually done a tutorial on how to recreate a small image into a full-size sheet, and I'll try to remember to link to that at the end of this video. And I've also printed this pattern onto some printable fabric. So I've emptied out the study, and I've also removed the little cushion from the window seat there, and I'm going to recover that. And I'm going to start now by doing something quite drastic, and I'm going to paint the back wall using this navy blue emulsion, and I'm also going to paint the front of the little window seat, and the navy blue will contrast really nicely with that blue and cream wallpaper that I've chosen. So that's 2 coats of the blue on the bench there and on the back wall, and shining the light on it I can just see a little bit of patching there, so I'll need to touch that up. And I also just annoyingly blobbed my paintbrush on the wall at the end, so I'll touch that up as well with the cream paint. Although I have been wondering whether to do this long wall, this door wall, with the wallpaper as well as the chimney breast. But what I'm going to do next is apply the paper to the chimney breast. I'll see how that looks, and I may actually do it on this side wall as well, because it's such a lovely paper, and I think this is quite a long wall, and that's a lot of cream. Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards doing this wall in the paper as well, but let's get the chimney breast done first. So what I've actually done here is made a template of the chimney breast, and I started by using the patchwork method to actually go around and create this shape, and then I've transferred that onto one single sheet of paper. And obviously it's so much easier to wallpaper when the chimney breast is free, but if you don't have that option and you're actually redoing a pre-built house, then this is a really good way of doing it. So we are going to have that line down there, whereas normally I would tuck that around the back. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to transfer the template onto the actual paper, and then we'll get that glued into place. So when I've come in and lined my template up on the landscape printed wallpaper, I've discovered quite annoyingly that it doesn't quite fit. So my template is overhanging the little white border at the bottom of the design. So if I line it up with the actual top of the print, you can see at the bottom there, it's probably 2 millimeters, if that, that I'm going to have in white. and that will be visible above the skirting board, so I don't want to do that. So what I've done is I've transferred the design, again using Adobe Photoshop, onto a portrait piece of paper, and obviously that will fit nicely that way now. And then I've printed it off twice. I'll get that piece out. So if you see where the design comes to, if I line it right up along the side of the actual pattern, this crease here is on the right hand side of the chimney breast, and this piece folds around where it can't actually be seen by looking into the doll's house unless you were to put your head right in there. So what I've done is I've printed the second sheet as a draft print, so it didn't use up as much ink as this sort of high quality one. And plus the join between the two pieces will be on that hidden edge as well. So I'm quite happy with that. So what I'm going to do now is cut this out. I'm actually going to start by removing those white strips around the edge, or the white border. So what I want to do now is join the two pieces up. So I'm just overlapping by the width of a bird. So I'm just going to apply glue along the strip of my first sheet, so the sheet that will be over on the left, or the visible sheet rather. And I just want to put a bit down that edge. I'm using that bird as a guide. Make sure you're not sticking your paper to your work surface or your sheet. Like that. And then I'm just going to turn that sheet over just because it's now got a bit of glue on it. Like that. And then line up my pattern. So if I start at the bottom there, I think I could just see a little bit of the bird's beak sticking out. That's how I'm sort of getting it perfectly lined up. Like that, and then just gently press that down. Okay, so this is where you need to be really careful, and I'm only saying this because I've sort of made this mistake in the past, where you put a template the wrong way around on your paper, and obviously when you come to stick it to the wall it's back to front. So I know this is the right way around because this cutout is for the little bench over on the right hand side, but if that cutout wasn't there and this was symmetrical, then just write front or F or something on the front, just so you know that that's the front of your template or the face of your template. And then just have a practice laying it down on the right side of the paper, and then turn your paper over and just remember where your template was, so it's over to this right hand side, and then you can lay it on again face down, so it's always face down to the back of your paper, so face down to the wrong side. So if you just try and remember that, and I know it just sounds so obvious, but sometimes when you're doing things you don't think about things like that, or I don't anyway, I just sort of rush on and then you realise the mistake you've made. And of course if you're sort of printing your own paper you can put it right because you can just print another sheet, but if you've sort of gone to the expense of buying something then it is a bit of a pain. So do always just be really careful, have a think about it and double check before you make any cuts. So I'm just trying to get this lined up here now, and I want it to be as exact to the template as possible, because once it's in place I don't want to have to start making any little adjustments or cuts and risking sort of ruining it or creasing it or actually cutting into it. Okay, so once you're sort of happy that you've got it lined up, so I've gone along that line, that edge there straight, and I think the actual walls in the doll's house aren't straight, or not so much the walls, but where I've obviously glued the chimney breast in and the skirting board. So obviously maybe a little bit higher on one side because that needs to come up and that needs to go down. But what I'll do is I'll line it up like that, and then I can just trim off any tiny little bits before I go and glue it into place. So get it lined up and then bring in your masking tape, and we're just going to stick this in the areas that we're not going to be keeping. So obviously on the inside of the chimney breast opening, so that will all be cut away. I can put a bit along that side there, and along the top. Like that. And then I'm actually going to use my craft knife to cut this out, and I'm going to do it on this sheet just because I don't want to put my paper, the right side of my paper, down on my cutting mat, which might be a little bit dirty and dusty, so I don't want to mark the paper. But I'm not bothered about cutting into this sheet because this is an old one and I've got plenty more. So I'll start by going along that top edge, and I've got a new blade in my knife, which is always a good idea when you're sort of cutting paper with it. I'm going to turn it and just do along that long edge. And then cut out these sort of extra little bits that go around the bench and the inside of the fireplace. And I keep saying inside of the fireplace, it's not really, it's just around the surround. Like that. And then just carefully remove the template from the paper. Okay, so I just want to try that in place and also crease the edges back in. So that's a really nice fit around the fireplace there. And I need to trim a little bit off up there underneath the coving and around that side as well, I think. I didn't cut the little bit out for the ridge of the mantelpiece. That goes quite nicely along there. So that will crease there. And I need to trim a little bit more off the back there, but not all the way up. So put it into place, and then you just need to crease it around and then make sort of marks with either a pencil or your fingernail or something. Probably better do it with your fingernail so you're not going to end up with marks actually on the paper as to where you need to make those small adjustments. So I really do just need to take a little slither off along that end, a little bit more at the bottom there, so I've obviously cut it at a bit of an angle. Now I can just sort of push around the edge of the surround, and then that will just fold round at the end there. So I'll take that back into my craft room and do that. But just sort of having a look overall, I think that looks really nice. And I did cut two extra pieces, or one extra piece in the landscape to go along this side long wall. So I'll show you how that's going to look in a moment. So I've made the necessary adjustments to my piece of wallpaper, and I'm now going to fit that into place. But because I'm going to have to move the camera and the tripod, I'm going to have to do that off camera, so we'll come back when that's done. So that's the paper now stuck into place, and I'm really pleased with that. And then if I just show you, let me just move the light over to the other side like that. So I've got those 2 landscape sheets as well, and I just want to show you what they'll look like over here. If I just lay that there, and obviously it will be up a bit higher, I think that will look really nice. I think that looks nicer than that sort of broad expanse of just pale cream wall. And the landscape print just fits nicely in between the coving and the skirting. Even with the borders trimmed off, there's a little bit left over. So that will be a nice fit. And I'll fit it against the back wall and then cut it above the door here, so the edge of the door, and that's where I'll join in the new piece. And that will be the sort of least noticeable join. So that's the wallpapering done, and I'm really pleased with that. I think that looks really good along there, and much nicer than just the plain cream wall. And then I also touched up the paint along that back wall, and also where I'd sort of dabbed a bit of the glue from the wallpapering along there. So I've touched that in. There was a little bit on the bench as well to touch in. So what I actually want to do now is recover that bench cushion that I removed. And when I pulled this off, this got a little bit torn. So I'm actually going to remake this and then cover it in the same fabric as the wallpaper. So let's go back into the craft room and do that now. So I've recut my piece of card, just going by the measurements of that, but I would always say just go and check that in place, just to be on the safe side, and just before you do all of the covering and everything and then go and try it, and perhaps it doesn't fit anymore, you might have stretched that a bit, or it might have shrunk back with the glue or anything like that. So always just double check. You don't want to waste your time. I'm just going to put a bit of glue directly onto the card. I know that's going to be too much because I never get that right. Spread that out. And if you're measuring for a sort of seat cushion or built-in seat cushion from scratch, then always allow a couple of millimetres on the length and width, just to allow for the thickness of your fabric which will be wrapped around. Otherwise you'll find that it sort of overhangs your seat, or will be a bit too tight getting it back in. Okay, so I'm just laying that onto the foam like that, along 2 straight edges. And then I've got here a piece of kitchen towel, which I'm going to lay on there. Move that glue out of the way, and then weigh that down with a nice heavy book. And leave that to dry. Once you've allowed enough time for the glue to dry, cut around your piece of card. And then apply a piece of double-sided tape along the card. So I've cut a piece of fabric, leaving a border of about 15 millimetres or 5/8 of an inch around all edges. And I've also utilised the sort of white border on the edge of the fabric, as that's going to be tucked under. That way you don't waste anything. So remove the backing from the double-sided tape. And then fold over your long edges. So your front and back edges. Nice edge along there. So you don't want to pull too tightly so that you're distorting the foam, but you want that to look nice and neat. And then make a cut along each corner of the fabric, so up to the corner of your foam. Do that at both ends. And then on the back of the piece, cut away the square. So on the inside edge there. And then you're leaving those little flaps at the sides. And then you'll need a little bit more glue for this next step. So apply glue to each side of the tape, and this is to bring up those end flaps. To pull that up like that, again not pulling too tightly. And the same at the other end. And if you've got anything sort of overhanging the front or back edge of your cushion, or the visible edge, then you can just snip that off at a bit of an angle. Like that. That one as well. So I'm not sure which way around I'm going to be sticking this yet. And then we want to bring these flaps round, so I'll have it so that that bit is back against the window, and then obviously my birds are the right way around, so this will be my front edge here. So do the little back flaps first, and when you do them, angle them so they're going towards the bottom of the foam. Sort of angle it downwards slightly like that, just so they're not going to be showing at the top of your seat, and then you can glue down those remaining flaps. That creates a nice neat corner. Like that, and we can now go and stick this into place. So I'm going to apply glue to the back of this. Press that into place in there. And have a cocktail stick handy as well, and then if you've got any little threads poking out, you can just poke those in underneath your cushion. So the final change that I want to make in here is to the floor. Now, I just want to show you, I sanded a little section over in that back corner and then had a go at applying some walnut wood dye, as I want this to be a nice dark wood floor, but as you can see that didn't really work. So it would take an awful lot of sanding now to get this paint off of the floorboards and recover with wood dye. So what I'm actually going to do is use a 0.8mm thick sheet wood and cut some more strips, colour them and then lay them into place. So it's not ideal, but when you're sort of working on a room that's already been done, so to speak, it's a good alternative. So let me go and find out my 0.8 sheet wood. So I've got plenty of 0.8 sheets here, and I'm going to cut them into strips measuring 12.5mm, and that's about ½ an inch wide, which is the width of the strips that I've already got in the doll's house. So I'm going to begin with a couple of sheets, and I've got a couple of sheets here that are cracked, so I'm going to use those. And then I'll sort of roughly lay them into place in the doll's house, just to see how many I'm going to need, because I don't want to cut up too many of these sheets and then find that I don't need them. So a nice sharp pencil, and just begin by making 12.5 pencil mark at each end. And just start with a very light score and then go in a little bit deeper. So that's one. One down. So those two sheets gave me 14 strips. So I now want to go and try these actually in the study, and I know this isn't going to be enough, but it will just give me an idea of how many more I might need. So that's those 14 laid into place there. So counting the ones that are already there, I think I'm going to need about another 9 along there, and then obviously sort of accounting for half strips. I think I'll probably do another couple of sheets. I've got about another 14. And then if I can just balance the light and the camera here in one hand, I just want to show you how they're going to sort of butt up against what's already there. So because they're so thin, can you see I'm still going to have that lip above the fireplace, and they'll just sort of butt up to the skirting board there. So obviously I won't be able to tuck them underneath as I would if I was sort of doing the room from afresh, but they are going to butt up nicely against it like that. So they're not going to look too sort of bulky. And then the same along the door here. I'll sort of try and shape it around the shaped part of the surround, and then put like an extra little bit of strip in there so that we haven't got a gap between the sort of door surround, like little tiny bits to fill out there at the other side of the surround and things like that. And then what I'll do is I'll come along the front edge of these ones that are already in place and apply a bit of wood dye along there. So I may need to either scrape some of this off with a knife, or I might just be able to get away with sanding along that front edge, otherwise the wood dye isn't going to take. So I'll carry on cutting these now, and then I want to give them a coat of wood dye. So to make it easier to apply the wood dye, I've attached some masking tape to my sheet here, and then I'm just attaching the strips, and I'm leaving a gap between them because you need to be able to get along the edge of each piece as well, so that you're not going to have any natural wood showing once these pieces are in place. So that's one coat of walnut wood dye on each of those strips now, and that's now dry, so I can go ahead and apply the second coat. So before I start laying the new wood strips, I just want to have a look at this front edge here. Now I'm going to have to touch that in with wood dye because obviously it's still going to be visible from the front of the doll's house, but the wood dye won't take over the paint. So I'm going to use my craft knife just to scrape that paint away and get it back to the natural wood. So just really carefully, so I'm not sort of cutting too much into the wooden strip or the front edge of the doll's house, so I'm angling the knife. Just taking a little bit off like that, so that one's back to the bare wood now. And then I can touch that in with wood dye and then lay the new strips. And that will make these less prominent. And then once the whole house is done, I'm going to use the stone coating paint that I've already got on here, just to go over all of these edges and tidy it all up where I've got all this sort of overrun of paint, and that will neaten it all up. Okay, so I've gone along the front edge now, I'm just looking through the lens here, it looks like there's still a lot of paint on there, but the natural wood is now showing through. And the white that's sort of left underneath was the glue from underneath the strips. So I just put my knife along the very front edge there and peeled out as much of the glue as I could. And then I've gone along with a piece of 180 grade sandpaper. So I've now got my wood dye here and just a small detailing brush, and I'm going to go along the front edge of each of these. So I've done a couple of coats along there, and that's now looking a lot better, and when the strips are actually in place above, that's not going to be as noticeable. So what I'm actually going to do with the strips is measure and cut for a few rows, then apply the glue and then stick them into place, and then work my way across the room like that. So I've got here my craft knife to actually make the measurement on the strip. I'll push that right in, and then I just want to make a little score along the front edge here. And then I've got my old mitre cutter here to cut along that score. So this is a sort of funny area here because the strip doesn't continue on the other side, because obviously the little bench is in there. So I'm going to do a couple along here, and then when it gets to where it sort of continues, which will probably be the next strip, then I'll use the cut off bit of strip to go along there, and we'll do it like that. So as I said before, it's not really ideal because it's so much easier to lay them onto a template, but because once again I've sort of changed my mind in the middle, this is sort of the next best thing. I'm trying to get the little scores into the light because it's quite dark in here. And then as you can see as well, where I'm cutting them, I'm obviously removing the wood dye, so again I'll go along that front edge once they're all in place and just touch that in again and blend that in with what's underneath. So this one, because I've got a little bit of skirting board to cut round there, I'll just measure where the skirting board goes to there, and then the actual length I need to cut to. And then make a little mark for that little square I need to cut out to actually fit around the skirting board, like that. And I'll just take that back into my craft room to actually cut just that little square out, which you probably can't even see on camera because it's so dark. And then that will just slot around that skirting board there. So that one now fits nicely in there. And then so that it runs on with the one over the other side of the chimney breast, and so that all of the strips are going to then line up, I've made this one 9mm, which is the width of sort of that one that's left over in that far corner. And then I've just cut out a little bit for the skirting board on that side. So that will sit there like that. And then as we move along, they're all going to line up. And it does help having these old ones in place because I can use the lines of those as my guide. But if you just left that one as a whole strip, then as you sort of come to put your whole strips in as you go along, or your longer strips, they're going to angle across the room like that. So you want to make sure that your lines are always straight when you've sort of got obstacles in the way like that. So I'll cut a couple more now to fit either side of the hearth, and then I think I'll get some glue down and start gluing those into place. So that's those first few strips stuck into place there, and any sort of glue that I've got on the surrounding sort of fixtures, like I've got a bit on the bench there, I can touch up with paint once I've finished. This one is sitting up a little bit, and that's because the white one underneath just had a little bit of a lip on it, which I hadn't noticed before. But with these old sort of strip wood floors, you do get sort of uneven planks, so I'm not too worried about that. And any sort of glue on the top of the strips I can wipe off once it's all completely dried, and then I'm going to give the whole floor a coat of clear wax, so that will bring that sort of richness of colour back. So the rest of the floor should be pretty plain sailing now, until I sort of get to these areas over here where I need to cut around the door. Okay, so let's carry on. Okay, so we're almost done. I've got all of the sort of straight, easy pieces of flooring in, and I'm just left with this one piece that needs to be shaped around the door surround. Now I was determined to get that out of one piece rather than sort of doing it a mishmash of sort of 3 pieces. So what I've done is I've made a template here from wood and sort of stuck all the bits together with masking tape. Just press that down a bit harder so it doesn't all come apart as I take it out, so that I know exactly where to cut around the sort of shaped door surround parts. And I sort of tried 2 or 3 goes of this, so I've now only got one long enough strip of wood left to cut this from, which is there. So I'm now going to take this back into my craft room and cut this out, and hopefully that will work. So let's give it a go. And I'm actually going to just draw the template onto the piece of wood first, which will make it easier to cut out. So around all the little bits like that. And I tried doing it with paper, but it just wasn't working. The paper was creasing in places I didn't really want it to, so I kept getting it wrong. So hopefully this will work. And what I'm actually going to do is start sort of trying to cut it out freehand. That's where it comes to there. And then you can always make any little adjustments afterwards. Just get the basic shape. Cracked a bit off there, but as long as I keep it, that should be okay. So I've been back and forth with this a couple of times now and just made a couple of very small adjustments. I glued that little tiny end bit into place in the doll's house just in case I lost it. And this is now a pretty good fit with a bit of sort of pressing into place. I'm going to apply a bit of glue to the back of this now and then put this final piece into place. And that's the final piece in place. And I'm really pleased that I was able to do that in one piece rather than patching it all in. I think that looks pretty good. So I've now got a little bit of touching up to do on the paint where I've got some glue on the bench, and I've got a bit on the back wall as well somehow. And then I'm probably going to give the flooring another coat, and I've got to go along that front edge. Okay, so there is the completed study the second time around, and I'm really pleased with how that looks. Okay, so that's it for today, and I really hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you like the changes I've made in the study. I'm really pleased with it and can't wait to start making the new pieces of furniture and accessories, so do look out for those tutorials. Okay, so that really is it for today, and I'll see you again soon. Take care, bye!